Tim, being an astronaut is a pretty high-profile job, really, isn't it? How do you deal with that notoriety? You know, people must recognise you all over the place.
It is a high-profile job, as you know, and you know, has always been since the early days of space exploration. I found it particularly hard, especially coming from a military background where we don't tend to talk about our job that much and keep a lower profile. But of course, becoming an astronaut is also becoming an ambassador for space. And part of what's really helped me embrace that is the outreach program. I've really enjoyed going around talking to school students and university students and sharing the mission as much as possible. So I think what's different now as well is social media. Of course, it's a much bigger platform. Everybody's much more interconnected.
So when you go to school, I just wonder, I'm always asked about things like, it's that visceral stuff, it's the eating, drinking, going to the toilet and sleeping. Is that the same thing for you?
It is, it is, and it's funny, isn't it, that you know, no matter all the technology that we're involved in, all the science that we're involved in, the future of space exploration, and it boils down to, yeah, but how do you go to the loo in space, and how do you sleep? But that's, you know, that's what makes us human, and I think that that's what's so wonderful. You know, part of what we've done as humans, humanity, in leaving our own planet and being able to look back on our own planet is absolutely incredible. But that's why when we engage with people, I find it wonderful that they just want to know about the physical experience. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it, I mean, for me it was 29 years ago. For you, already
4 years ago.
years. I mean, does it already seem like there's been advancements in technology? I'm trying to think, have we got anything particular here? So this in the cupola, for instance, or here I'm reading this Gagarin book.
Yes.
But I mean, I didn't have a cupola like that to look out of. I mean, has anything much changed on ISS since then even?
In terms of the physical structure of the space station, not so much, although we're having commercial crews deliver cargo. But I think in some cases it's the smaller advances in terms of communications and technology. Internet on the station, even when I was up there 4 years ago, it was dial-up speed, and it really wasn't worth trying to go onto the internet. Now, you know, the bandwidth is much faster, much higher, and so connectivity is always improving. And technologies, virtual reality now is such a good training environment to be able to use virtual reality for an upcoming spacewalk, for example, or a robotics task that's particularly complex. And on the space station, we can just pop on a set of virtual reality goggles. When I was up there, we had to use a laptop, and we turned the laptop upside down and put the laptop on our head. We strapped it onto our head, and that's how we got our VR environment. Now it's, you know, these swanky virtual reality glasses. So things are constantly changing.
Yeah, I think it is interesting, though. You say it is inventing itself, and yet the similarities go back, don't they? So it's looking out of the window. I mean, it's just those views out. I mean, a lot of these pictures, this one you picked up for Soyuz as well, it's just those views that, I mean, somehow the blue here, it's kind of accurate. The blue here, the brilliance is nice, but you don't somehow get that vibrancy.
No. And what's missing, and I find very hard to describe to people, is the pure white of sunlight, which we never see here on Earth, even on the sunniest day. You know, you have that, the atmosphere acts as a filter, and with Rayleigh scattering, we get the yellow light of the sun. But when you get that first sunrise from space, and it's just the whitest white, the purest white, yes, and contrasted against the blackest black of space. And I just remember looking at that contrast, and it's most unnatural.
I mean, there's a black here that's pretty black during your spacewalk, isn't it? I mean,
yes,
looking behind. Did you ever look away from the space station?
I did. We had a few minutes there where we had to wait for the sun to go down. We were repairing what was effectively the circuit breaker, so there was no way for mission control to switch off the electrical power. So the only safe thing to do was to wait until the sun went down before we started work, from risk of electric shock. So we had about 10 minutes where Tim and I just clipped on and pushed ourselves away from the space station and enjoyed those few moments floating in space. Because
usually you do a spacewalk in the light. I mean, it's usually actively desired, isn't it? You don't want to go out in the dark.
For the complex tasks, yes, but you know, with the whole 45-minute sunset, we try and time some of the more complex tasks for the day part of the orbit. But inevitably, you end up working at night. It's actually really disorientating at night time in just the pool of light provided by your helmet lights and helmet cameras there, you can lose where you are. You can turn upside down, but of course it doesn't feel like upside down, and suddenly the airlock, which was that way, is now that way, and astronauts have headed off in completely the wrong direction and I actually got lost, and there are big black arrows outside the space station saying airlock, arrows this way, so that if you do get disorientated you can find your way back again.
But so go on.
Yeah, no, something I wanted to touch on was emergencies, because of course on the Mir space station there was the serious fire in '97, so after your mission, and the depressurization with the docking emergency. But you know, how did you feel in terms of the Mir space station, in terms of its security, the protection? Did you feel in a safe environment? Did you feel ready for the emergencies?
I felt safe, actually. There were things that weren't always perfect, and I suppose no space mission goes without something going wrong, does it? Things that went wrong were things like we had an electrical failure. So just before my mission, there'd been another module attached to the Mir station, which itself was shielding some of the solar panels from the sun at certain times, so we weren't getting enough electrical energy in the batteries. And suddenly, with an extra 3 people on the station, 5 altogether, we were draining that electrical energy much more so. And there had been some calculations, and they were thinking we might just kind of get by, but we didn't.
Right.
And so there was one night the alarms all sounded. You know, what's going on? And the alarms sounded quite often, actually. After my first day, I realised that it wasn't anything to get particularly worried about.
Did you find yourself getting desensitised to
almost,
it?
yes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it was the same alarm that woke us up in the morning.
Right.
And
that's the same as the emergency alarm?
Gets you out of bed pretty quickly.
Okay.
I'm sure it's different now. So because no electrical energy left, the lights started going out, and the fans that circulate the air were switching off. And of course, you know that's not the darkness that you worry about so much, but you worry about this air circulation, because you don't get the convection currents circulating in an orbiting space station, because the air is apparently weightless, and you can suffocate in your own breath if you just stay still. So sure that you're moving about, but the beautiful thing about that, it was quiet, because it's so noisy, and I think Mir was noisier than ISS, isn't it? Were all the modules similarly noisy, or did you have a difference?
Each module's got its own idiosyncrasies on the space station. So some are noisier than others. Some are, if anyone's running on the treadmill, for example, the treadmill generates a lot of noise. And if somebody's sprinting fast, it can get up to 80 decibels. Now that's the noise that a fighter jet pilot would experience with afterburners on inside the cockpit. So it's very, very loud. But no, I mean, for example, the Japanese segment for a Japanese module seemed to me to be the quietest, and also the warmest. So at night time, it was quite nice to go in there and, you know, warm up if you were a bit chilly.
How interesting. So warm, and if you want to be warm and peaceful, you go into the Japanese part. I mean, it's that whole feeling weightlessness business, isn't it? Just that floating around. That and there's a picture here of when I first experienced it. And it's just this. I'm with Ryoko Kikuchi, who was the backup to the mission before mine from Japan, and it's just that exuberance of feeling it for the first time. You're here being very very sedate, but then of course you've been used to feeling weightless for a long time by this.
Yes, but I remember again the parabolic flights, the first time of experiencing that, and of course it's like going over a bridge very, very quickly. You get the stomach, that initial stomach jumping up. But then your body's kind of like, oh, well, it's waiting for the bit where you come back down again, and that never happens. And then I remember thinking, oh, well, this is it. This is now weightlessness, and this is what it feels like. But over a period of a couple of weeks, it's amazing how your body just adapts the most relaxed position that it possibly can. Once you get used to it, it's the most relaxed night's sleep that you could possibly have.
But I had backache, actually, and so at night I found that it was better for me if I went sort of sideways in my sleeping bag and bent a knee up. So it wedged me in and it kind of stretched my back. And I assume I had backache for the common reason that our spines are stretching a bit in space. I mean, did you get that as well?
I was very lucky. I didn't get backache, and you know, some of my colleagues did, and again they had to kind of put themselves into a ball and go knees to chest and do that stretch where it just helped their back. I had shoulders, my shoulders ached. I think it's because your shoulders rise up without gravity, energy. So you end up working a lot like this, and it's a very unnatural position to be in here on Earth. But in space, it's a very natural position to be in. But your muscles are not used to working like that.
I mean, were you advised then to actively try and move
actively
down?
try and push them down and stretch them back again.
Yes.
So I guess you had, was it bungees the Russians used to love?
Well, they did, but I was only in space for 8 days altogether, so I didn't do any exercise. It was, but you would have become quite seriously, unfit, wouldn't you, to come back to Earth if you hadn't done anything?
Yes, and we learnt a lot from the Mir space station in terms of how cosmonauts can improve by using exercise to try and encourage that bone ligament interaction, which causes the osteoblasts to generate more bone density. And this is a great photograph. I think it just shows some of the camaraderie that you have with your colleagues in space, and that sort of natural bonding experience. But I love the fact that we have the same galley table.
Yes. That you would, with these bungee strap things that you could sort of shove food or paper or whatever.
In 24 years, the kitchen table hasn't changed.
But this one I love, because this one here we've got bacon sarnie, and I love that because they've got it's not just sandwich, it's but bacon sarnie, and then this very sort of this lovely Russian underneath.
That's right. Everything has to have the English and Russian translation.
Was this one of your specials, though, for you?
It was one of my specials. So 10% of the food, 10% of our nutritional intake, we're allowed to choose. Bonus food, it's called. And you can have commercial off-the-shelf products as long as they've got enough shelf life and they comply with the regulations, or you can have things made for you. And at the European Space Agency, we like to try and use that as a fun way of engaging with the public. So in this case, we had a competition amongst school children to design a meal for an astronaut for a day. So they had to come up with all the right things in terms of low salt content, highly nutrition, all the right vitamins, minerals, etc., and calorific value, because we need to get up to about 2,500 calories per day, maybe 3,000 calories. And a bacon sarnie was one of the things that was brilliant. One of the school children came up and said, well, we need a bacon sarnie in space. It's a very British thing. And we engaged Heston Blumenthal to actually develop and cook the food. They tried about 25 different types of bread before they got the perfect bread that could survive for 2 years in a can and would still come out tasting fresh with warm butter, a bit of tomato ketchup and a nice piece of bacon in there.
But it was all was in there together. The butter ketchup, it was all in one.
There together. Yeah. So that tin, you just shove it in the warmer. And out it pops.
Yes. And the warmer, of course, if it's the same as what I had, it would basically a bit like a sort of a toaster, metal plates that would then warm up, and then that would conduct the heat through the metal of the tin. Did you have the same thing?
Absolutely the same thing, yes. And we would all kind of put our lunch in or our dinner in 25 minutes before we need it, let it warm up. And then it was nice, I don't know if you had the time to eat together as a crew or if you're all too busy, but normally during the day lunch would be very busy on the go, but every evening we would try and just come together as a crew and to share that meal and share the experience. And what I find fascinating is some people think, oh gosh, you're so claustrophobic in space, didn't you want your own space to be away from people? And I found exactly the opposite. A lot of my day was spent working by myself on my own schedule. And so in the evening, you wanted that human contact. You wanted to relax with your fellow crewmates. So Helen, before my mission, you were incredibly generous with your time and offering your experience as to helping me prepare for my mission. And one of the things, of course, I asked was there anything that you wanted me to fly to the International Space Station? And you came up with a wonderful idea of flying this book, Yuri Gagarin's Road to the Stars, the English translation that was signed by Yuri Gagarin himself. But I'm fascinated to know, how did you come by this book in the first place?
A manager of the Soviet Space Agency, as it was then, had been given this book by Gagarin and just cherished it. But it was an English translation. He didn't really understand English, and he thought it would be very appropriate for me just to take it into space and then to bring it back to the UK afterwards. So he gave it to me while I was finishing my training in Star City, and we put it off on a progress ship just before I launched, and then I brought it back with me. It was so kind of you to offer to to take something, you know. And the fact that you're able to take this, people don't often take a lot of paper into space.
Yes, yeah, and also weight, of course, now if you want to take a book into space, people just say, well, that's sure, you can take 100 books, we'll put it onto the iPod, you know, or you can listen in audiobook. So if you say, no, actually, I want to take a physical book with me, then it has to be something special because of the weight and the fact it's paper, which you know, can be a fire risk. So, but that was clearly a very, very special book. Made more so, of course, we had the Mir stamp in and your crew's signature in as well.
And then your crew. So did they appreciate, do you think, what significance this book might have actually had?
Oh, very much so. Yes. In fact, you know, some of the Russian colleagues were really interested in looking at it and reading it. You know, they've pretty much all read Yuri's version himself, his Russian version. So they were delighted that, you know, we had this wonderful piece of history that was up on board the space station. And now, of course, the story continues with the book's journey to the National Space Centre in Leicester and beyond, we hope.
Oh, no. So yes, the idea is, National Space Centre has been great to say that although, you know, it's on loan here, and to be quite honest, you know, I don't ever imagine I will need to take it back home and just read it for posterity. But of course, its next journey might be another British space mission. I mean, that's just something I'd love to have. Do you any idea when we're going to get another mission?
Well, hopefully there'll be another mission by 2024. A lot of that depends on the timetable with commercial crew, you know, back to the space station. But I think what's even more exciting is that there's a tradition that we've started here that every British astronaut who's ever lived has the opportunity now and in the future to take this book to space with them. So who knows in 50 years' time, in 100 years' time, in 500 years' time, where this book might travel to.